Welcome back to Storytime. We're back to reading The Chocolate Touch. We just finished chapter 8, where John had been in the orchestra and his instrument had turned to chocolate and made a terrible mess. How embarrassing. Let's see what adventures John gets next. Chapter 9. Oh, the shame of it! The humiliation! John wept breathlessly as he ran, shocked and frightened and indignant and angry at the world that had suddenly turned against him. Mean old things, John thought, blaming Miss Plimsoll and Mrs. Quiver for his failures, even though nothing that had happened to him had been their fault in any way. Horrible old school, he thought, even though he had liked school until that morning. Hateful Susan, he thought, even though he knew at the same time that he was really longing to be friendly with him again. Through the window, Miss Midas saw John coming up the pathway. "Hello, John, dear," she called from the living room. "You're home early today. How nice. As a reward, there'll be a piece of chocolate after supper." Oh, do you think he's going to like this chocolate now? "I hate it," John shouted. He was crying too hard to say anything else for a moment. When she heard the sound of his voice, Mrs. Midas rushed into the hall. "Why, what's the matter, dear?" she asked, putting, almost 2 pages. Let's get the page. There we go. Her arm around him. John twisted away from her grasp, ran past her, and started up the stairs towards his bedroom. "Susan doesn't want me to go to her birthday party," he said as he went. "I know she doesn't. Well, I don't want to go to her rotten old party anyways." "I don't think you really mean it," Miss Midas said. "Besides," she added, and John was halted by the softness of her voice, "Mrs. Buttercup just telephoned to say she was going to drive over herself at 4 o'clock to pick you up." "She did?" John said, blinking down at his mother at the top of the stairway. "Yes, she did," Mrs. Midas assured him. "So you'd better hurry and get yourself washed and brushed. Your party clothes are laid out on your bed." There were games on the Buttercup's lawn, while it was still warm enough outside. Later, the party supper, including the birthday cake, was going to be served indoors, and there would be a magician and a short movie. John joined in the blindman's bluff and grandmother's footsteps and fox and geese, and soon he became more cheerful, even temporarily forgot about all the chocolate mess that had happened. Susan looked very pretty. Her yellow curls had been brushed so hard that they looked like even silkier than ever. She was wearing a big blue ribbon, the same color as her eyes. A deeper pink than her new party dress was the flush of her cheeks with excitement. On her feet were dainty little white socks and white shoes with straps that buttoned. Between games, Susan smiled at John and said, "I'm glad you came." They seemed to be on good terms again. Seemed to be. Maybe that means something's coming. Then Mr. Buttercup kept approaching, bringing a bucket of water from the garage. He set it down in the middle of the lawn without spilling a single drop. "We're going to dunk for apples," Susan whispered to John. "The boys against the girls. You can be captain of the boys' team." The 2 teams lined up for the race, Susan leading the girls and John the boys. "And the idea of this," Mr. Buttercup explained, "when I say go—" "Not yet, John. Susan and John will run to the bucket." There were 12 apples floating in the bucket and 12 people in the race, using only their teeth. Susan and John will grab their apples with their teeth and run back to their lines. As soon as they touch the hands of the number 2 runner in their teams, Dinny and Duncan, Susan and John will go to the end of their lines, and Dinky and Duncan will run to the bucket to dunk for apples. Do you all understand the way it's going to work? All right. 1 to get ready, 2 to get steady, 3 to go. Now I'm going to pause for a minute. What happens when John puts anything in his mouth? Yep, turns to chocolate. Let's see what happens. Susan bounded ahead like a jackrabbit and had her face deep in the bucket by the time John reached her side and crouched down for his apple. He got his eye on the big red one with its stalk jaunting up conveniently for him to grab it. Now that's the stalk where like the stem that comes out of the apple, so it might make it a little bit easier for him. He lowered his face, opened his mouth, and lunged at the apple. Somehow his nose reached the apple before his teeth did and pushed it below the surface of the water. John's mouth followed the apple down into the water. Have any of you done dunking for apples where you use your mouth to get an apple out of a bucket of water? Not an easy game to play. Let's see what happens next. Then a terrible thing happened. The clear water in the bucket turned into dark brown, sweet liquid chocolate. Susan and John immediately pulled their heads up out of the water, but it was too late. Their faces were drenched with chocolate syrup. "Oh!" Susan exclaimed, wiping the chocolate out of her eyes. Chocolate syrup dipped down all over her delicate, pale pink dress. "Oh!" she moaned. John was in the same state. There was chocolate all over his face. There was chocolate on his white shirt front and on his gray flannel shorts. And there was chocolate in his mouth. "Look," John said. "Look." Susan was too surprised and angry to speak. For the second time that day, she turned her back on John and ran away from him. Mrs. Buttercup offered to clean John up, but he couldn't bear to stay at the party another minute. He started off at once for home. There's a picture of John and Susan with chocolate all over their faces. What a mess that made. And that, my friends, is the end of chapter 9. See you back for chapter 10. Bye for now.